Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Spirit of Texas Author Spotlight. I'm Lauren Scott, Chair of the Spirit of Texas Reading List Committee. In this episode, we are excited to welcome Spirit of Texas 2024 honoree, Kathryn Ormsbee, author of the middle grade novel, VIVIAN LANTZ'S Second Chances. Joining us for this interview is Spot Committee member Kim Warwick. Kim Warwick is currently the librarian at Beckendorf Junior High in Katy, Texas. This is her 33rd year in education and 12th year as a librarian. She is an avid reader, kiki to Harper and Jackson, and loves all things Halloween.
Hi, guys. This is Kim, and I am here today with Kathryn Ormsbee, who grew up in a secret garden in her backyard and a spaceship in her basement. She writes stories about magical worlds, mysterious towns, tenacious teens, and more. Her other middle grade books include Candidly Klein and Growing Pains. She was born in the Bluegrass State. Since then, she's lived across the pond in England and Spain. She's lived in a lot of fascinating cities stateside and currently lives in Austin, Texas with her amazing wife. So hello there, Kathryn. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing really well. I'm excited to hear you're a big enthusiast for Halloween as well. It's my very favorite holiday.
Halloween should be a national holiday.
I agree.
It's the best. You don't have to get gifts for anybody. You don't have to spend time with family. Not that family's not great. And you get to dress up and be somebody else, and there's candy. I mean, it's amazing.
Agreed. What could be better?
Yeah, it's awesome. So we're here today to talk about your book. And a lot of people might not have had the chance to read it yet. So you want to tell us about it?
Absolutely. So VIVIAN LANTZ'S Second Chances is about a 13-year-old girl named Vivian Lantz, and she is about to start her first day of 8th grade. Her best friend has just moved away to another state, so she's already a little nervous about that, going back to school without her best friend. But the worst thing is, Vivian believes she's under a curse. She's never had a good first day of school. They're all disastrous. One first day, her appendix burst in the middle of school, and another one, she turned over accidentally this giant vat of glitter. And another one, she had food poisoning and ended up puking during gym class. So Vivian is convinced that she's going to have another terrible first day. But with the help of her very favorite author, who gives her this inspirational message right before school, she decides she's going to turn things around and make this a good day. Unfortunately, her first day ends up being really awful all over again. And just when Vivian thinks that all hope is lost, she wakes up the next day and miraculously, she's starting her very first day all over again. It's the same day, it's reset. So she ends up being stuck in this time loop where she keeps living through her first day, and she has to figure out along the way what a good first day actually really means to her.
I loved it. I felt, of course, I got the Groundhog Day vibe. But then I thought, my junior high kids probably don't even know what that movie is. But
I know.
I know, I loved it though. So what inspired you to write this story?
Well, you mentioned one of them right there. So the first one is just the general idea of a time loop movie or book. I grew up watching Groundhog Day and was fascinated by this idea of being stuck in the same day over and over again, which could simultaneously be really scary and upsetting, but also might be a chance to turn things around and do them better. So that was a really huge inspiration. And then the second one was actually the city of Austin. I love Austin, Texas. I've lived here off and on since 2012. And I think that the city is so zany and unique and larger than life. And it almost feels like it's a character in its own right. So I paid tribute to Austin once before in my first young adult novel, Lucky Few, but I hadn't ever written it into a middle grade novel. So I also wanted to write a book that was set in Austin and really make it feel vibrant and exciting the way it feels to actually visit or live in Austin. So those were two inspirations.
I think you did a great job because Austin is definitely its own kind of quirky city.
It is.
I have family there, so I can say that. Yeah. But so were any of the events, how did you come up with all those crazy, disastrous first days?
Luckily, none of them are based on my own.
I was hoping hoping not. I was like,
I feel very lucky that I did not have the same curse that Vivian thinks that she is under. I mean, they just came out of the old imagination. And I didn't have fun making Vivian suffer or go through a lot of really embarrassing, terrible moments, but it was fun to be able to piece them all together over the course of the book.
I was just like, good grief, what more can this poor girl go through?
I know.
I loved it. So which part of the book was the hardest to write and why?
Yeah, so again, going back to the time loop idea. So I've written about, I think, 12 books before Vivian. And the reason I had never tried to write a time loop story before then was because I just wasn't sure if I had the chops yet. Because writing a time loop novel, on the one hand, it seems like maybe it's easy because it's the same day, but it's really hard to write because it's the same day. So you have to make it still unique every single day while also keeping in mind this very tight timeline of things that are happening. So you can't really be quite as creative if you're just writing a normal novel and anything can happen on any day. It's kind of set into, okay, at 2:05 p.m., this thing needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen, there has to be a really good reason why it didn't. Maybe a character went down a different hallway or they had a different conversation. So it's kind of this galaxy brain thing of thinking about how the dominoes are going to fall. So when I wrote Vivian, I finally felt like I was capable of plotting out the story, but I had to be really minute in the way that I plotted out every single chapter because I did have to keep in mind this timeline. And I'll give a big shout out to my copy editor. So for young readers who are unfamiliar, a copy editor is one of your editors who towards the end of the revision process goes through your manuscript with a fine tooth comb and they say like this comma doesn't go here, it goes here. And they say popsicle has to be capitalized with a capital P because it's a brand name. It's all the little things that you don't think about. But another thing they do oftentimes is they'll create sort of a chronology of events and they'll also catch if there's any discrepancies or if like, well, actually the school bell rang before this person said this thing, so you have to shift it to after they say this thing and this timeline. Luckily, I had a really amazing editor and copy editor to make sure that the domino effect didn't spiral out and create a big mess of time wobbly goop.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking you've got to be really organized. So,
Yes.
and you had good help, but I'm sure you had to be very organized.
I did, sometimes people talk about in the author community, if you plot or pants, like if you just fly by the seat of your pants and just write it as it comes to you. And I have author friends who do that and write amazing books. But for this book in particular, I had to plot because if I didn't, there would just be no way to keep track of everything.
All right. I think you did a great job because
Well,
it was a
thank
fun read. Who was your favorite character to write? And why was that character your favorite?
Well, I have to say Vivian. She's the reason I wrote this book in the first place as a main character. I really love Vivian. She's got a lot of grit and gumption and a lot of optimism, despite the fact that she's had so many terrible first days and a whole series of unfortunate events. And she has a really unique and creative way of viewing the world. I think she really loves a particular fantasy series. It's this fictional fantasy series called Relevane, and it's by her favorite author, Q.S. Murray. And Vivian and I aren't alike in a lot of ways, but one way where we are alike is that I also really loved and continue to love fantasy novels. So I really enjoyed being able to infuse the story with this because she sees a lot of the world or makes comparisons a lot of times to the relevant books and the different characters and their quests and side quests in the novel. And being able to tell the story through Vivian's way of looking at things was a whole lot of fun. So by far, Vivian's my favorite.
She was a neat character. She was very fun to read about. If you were to write a book about a side character, who would you pick and why?
I love this question. This is fantastic. I love a lot of my secondary and even tertiary characters and had so much fun writing each of them. But I think if I had to choose, I would pick Arlo, who is Vivian's older brother. because when the story takes place, Arlo's going through a lot. He's kind of a tortured musician, and he wants to go on tour with his band, and he's having some conflict at home with his parents. And I think that would be a lot of fun to write into a young adult novel. Arlo's older than Vivian, he's about 17. But I think I'd have a lot of fun writing about him going on tour with his bandmates and all the adventures that unfold from that.
Well, maybe we'll see Arlo one day.
Maybe,
Maybe that would be kind of fun. So, well, speaking of that, what can you tell us about your next book?
Yeah, so my next book that's coming out is called Turning 12, and it is a middle grade graphic novel that is a sequel to my graphic novel Growing Pains. And it's illustrated by the amazing Molly Brooks. She's fantastic, and it'll be coming out towards the end of October, on October 29th. So Halloween time. I'm very excited about a Halloween release.
Well, that I'm like my kids at my school will be dying to get their hands on a new graphic novel.
Yes, I love graphic novels, and it's been so fun to be able to write one, not just one, but two. So yeah, this one just picks up where the first one left
Okay.
off. It's this one, the main character actually is modeled on me because they're both creative memoirs. So it's about my experience growing up in Kentucky, being homeschooled, experiencing anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, but also just a lot of fun like middle school adventures. So going to summer camp, being in a musical theater production, having your first babysitting job, making new friends. So I cannot wait for it to come out. I've been working on it for over 2 years now. So really, really thrilled for it to come out in October.
Well, it sounds very relatable. I think a lot of kids and even me can say, "Oh, I remember that."
Yeah, yeah, I hope
Awesome.
so.
So, are you working on any other projects?
I am. Unfortunately, it's under wraps right now, so I can't
Oh,
talk about it. But I'm really hopeful that in the coming months, I'll actually be able to announce something. I'm super, super stoked about this project. So fingers crossed, I'll be able to share something in the next few months.
well, good luck on that. Hope it goes well. So, we have some questions from readers. How did you get your first book published?
Yeah. So I love answering this question, especially when talking to students, because I first wrote my book, my very first book that got published when I was a teenager, and actually got my first literary agent when I was a teenager. So I really like to encourage students to not let your age prevent you from going after your dream, regardless of what it is. But in my case, of being an author, because it definitely is possible. So I first wrote The Water in the Wild, which was my debut novel in my freshman year of college. And it was inspired, as I mentioned, I really love fantasy. So it was inspired by a lot of the fantasy novels that I had grown up with. And it's the first in a trilogy. So I loved being able to write it, but it was definitely, I think, one of my hardest books to write because it was the first book that I finished. Up until that point, I had maybe made it in like a few chapters or to the middle of the book, and then got bogged down in the process. So I'd say one of the biggest things for me for getting published was just, it seems basic, but finishing the book was huge. So I found that plotting out this book helps me to finally finish it. And I then sent out what are called cold query letters. So just a query letter is a few paragraphs that describe your entire book. So no pressure, right? It's just giving the gist of your book. And a
That's
cold,
why kids need summarization skills.
yes, absolutely. I use them all the time. They definitely come in handy. Um, so yes, I had to really use my summarization skills to send out queries. And they're called cold queries when you don't know the agent, you don't have any kind of connection or introduction. So I just sent out query letters into the void to some literary agents that I had researched. And I was lucky enough to get an offer of representation. And then I worked with that agent to revise the book so it would be in top-notch shape to send out to publishers. And then a little later, she shopped it out to publishing houses, and we got a couple of offers and chose from one of those publishing houses. And then I began editing all over again. I think if you learn anything about book publishing, it's that it's a lot of revisions. not just first and second and third drafts, but like 55th and 62nd drafts. So you come to love revising as an author generally. So I worked with an editor on lots more revisions. And then finally the book was published 9 years ago, which is wild to me, in April of 2015.
That's amazing. That's good for our kids to know. Don't give up. Keep
Yes,
going.
absolutely. And I will say, and I think you'll hear this from any author, I got so many rejections from agents, and then we got so many rejections from publishing houses. But all it takes is one yes and someone who really is able to understand you and your book.
Love it. So, somebody wanted to know what's the hardest part of writing a book?
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't think I've ever had an identical process for any of the books that I've written, and I'm working on my 14th or 15th at this point. Some books have come really easily. It's almost like they're just flowing out of me like water. And then others are extremely difficult to write. It feels like pulling teeth, and every paragraph is difficult. But one thing that I can say is consistent across the board is that at some point in the process, whether it's drafting the book or oftentimes in the middle of publication, there always comes a point where I absolutely hate the book. I think it's the worst thing in the entire world, and I just want to throw it in the garbage. And I think I'm an imposter, and I've lost my ability to write, and everything's horrible. And then at a certain point, that goes away, and everything's okay again. And after comparing notes with a lot of my author friends and other people who are in creative fields, I think this is a pretty common experience. You just spend so much time with a creative work sometimes that you can't see the forest for the trees, and you get too in your mind about it. And I think that's what having a good community is for, having a good editor, having other writing friends, but also friends who don't do any writing to kind of give you perspective. So whenever that happens, and it always does, I just know, like, okay, this is the part where everything feels terrible. And then probably in a few days or maybe a couple weeks, it'll all pass away again. So I think pushing through that, whether it's finishing a book and trying to tie up all those loose ends that you started at the beginning and feeling overwhelmed, or getting to, that 50-second revision and feeling really discouraged, whenever it does pop up, I find it's really nice to reassure yourself that it's okay. It'll be okay. Everyone goes through this. I think even the best authors go through this process, and I'll come out on the other side.
Yeah, I never thought about that you might get tired of it. I mean, that's good to know.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, why editing and editors are so important, because you spend a ton of time with your book, and so does your editor, but to a somewhat lesser extent. So they're able to come in with perspective and kind of clue you into things that maybe you've just gotten too close to the
Right.
manuscript to see.
Interesting. So, what did it feel like to see your book on a shelf for the very first time?
Oh my goodness, it was magical. Even as an author, words fail. I can't describe how exciting that was. And I was lucky enough that when my book first came out, I was living in my hometown, which was the only year out of my entire 20s I happened to be there. But that meant that the first time I got to see it on the shelf, it was at the independent bookstore that I'd grown up visiting from the time I was like 2 years old. And so being able to see it there in this place where I had gone to readings before and I picked out so many of my favorite books growing up was really, really special. Yeah, words can't describe how fun that was.
Well, I'm going to throw my own question in here because authors are my rock stars, and I think I get really pumped up when I get to meet, writers. So who is like who would you like fangirl over? Somebody, an author that either you've met or you would like to meet? I kind of threw you on the spot there.
I know. Well, Anne and Martin, so I was obsessed with the Babysitter's Club books growing up. So if I could ever meet Anne in person, that would have just like sent me to the moon, because I read those backwards and forwards, like religiously, like just had the whole pastel rainbow of them on my bookshelf. And
Well,
there was Yeah, go ahead.
They're coming back around because of the graphic
They
novels.
are, which I am so excited to see.
Yes.
That makes me so happy. So I grew up reading the ones that were illustrated, I feel like in the 80s with like the really intricate illustration on the front cover. And yeah, being able to see them in graphic novel form and see the TV series come out. I watched the first season and just felt like I was 8 years old again. Made me
Oh.
really happy.
So, okay. So what is, well, we know one of your favorite books would then be Babysitters, but you said you love fantasy.
I do.
So what would be your favorite there?
Oh my goodness, that's really tough. I love historic materials. I grew up reading the Chronicles of Narnia and love those as well. Loved Harry Potter. And one of my favorites is The Gamage Cup by Carol Kindle. It's a little bit more niche, and it's not part of a series. But I was obsessed with that book when I was younger. It just had this really inventive world building, and it was all about this ragtag bunch of outsiders who'd kind of gotten ostracized from their very prim and proper community, and them kind of coming together and forming their own familial relationship. And in the end, having to save the town that had ostracized them. It's really beautifully written, and it's like a pretty short read as well. But I would oftentimes revisit that book, including when I was writing The Water in the Wild. If I ever got a little bit in a funk, I would go read a chapter from the Gamage Cup and remind myself what good writing looked like and feel inspired again.
Well, I love that you said good writing because that's what I always tell the kids when they say, well, I want to be a writer. I'm like, well, you need to be a reader too.
Yes, whenever anyone asks my tips for becoming an author, I say it's boring, but it's to read a ton and to write a ton, because the more you read, the more you're taking in good writing, you're absorbing what it looks like to craft a good story, good prose, but also what good structure looks like. I think it starts becoming intuitive at a certain point, and you just know when you're hitting the beats right. And then writing a lot is important too, because most of us are not Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and we can't write an incredible symphony on our first try. It takes a really long time to get good writing, and you probably won't get it right on your first try or maybe your 50th try, but you just have to keep writing and getting the content out so that you're practicing the same way you would for a sport or a musical instrument. Just have to practice more.
Well, so, okay. So your tips are reading, writing. Do you have any other you want to share?
Those are the really big ones. And I think, yeah, I think as much as possible, just try to have experiences in your life that aren't just confined to reading and writing. This is something I have to remind myself of, because especially when you're just writing, you're outputting a lot, but you're not bringing in a lot of experience. And so for me, being able to get out of the home, talk to people who have nothing to do with writing, going on a hike somewhere, just experiencing life a little bit more can oftentimes rekindle the creative spark that I have inside. It feels a little counterintuitive because you're not writing, so you're not doing the thing you should be doing. But oftentimes I find that I'm better and more efficient at my writing if I give myself a break and I just take in some external input, so that I feel more inspired and not
That
just stuck in my head.
that really resonates with me because lately, like when I'm doing something, I'm trying to be in the moment and put this thing, your phone, try to
Yes.
put that away and just be in the moment and have experiences. So I
Yeah.
love that you said that. That is really good. So what are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness. So right now, it's funny. Right now, I'm reading a book on stenography because I'm getting into stenography, which is if you ever see court reporters tip tapping on their typewriters, that is what I'm getting into. It's been very fascinating, and it appeals to a lot of my loves, including
I say,
writing.
are you going to use it for writing or is it just a hobby or?
Eventually, I'd love to, but I actually want to become certified so I can also do court reporting. Um,
Oh,
Yes, I know.
that would
Very,
be
very
cool.
fascinating. I know. I am super fascinated, and I'd say it's a little bit like it's typing, but it's your keys don't look anything like a normal QWERTY keyboard. You're writing shorthand, so in the way that you would write chords on a piano, you are chording words. So you're writing the entire word at once rather than putting letters together, which is why stenographers can go so fast. So it's a little bit typing, but it's also like learning a foreign language because you're having to memorize all these new shorthand briefs for words, and also a little like learning an instrument like playing piano because
Yeah.
you're learning how to chord and coordinate your hands. So that has been taking up a lot of my time lately. I've been a total nerd and reading lots of books on stenography.
Well, that's very interesting though. I mean, because yeah, that is cool. Well,
Yeah,
is there
I
any
love
okay, so I have to ask one last question. So would there be any, would you want to go back and have a second chance to do anything?
No, you know what? I don't. Because well, and it's I without giving too much away from the book, I think maybe Vivian would answer the same way after she has her experience.
Exactly. Because the
I
whole
think
time I kept thinking, I was like, well, what? And I was like, no. I was like, do I want to go back and redo anything? But
I'm tempted to, but then you think about the butterfly effect and all the things that might happen differently because you made one different decision. And I'm a very obsessive person, so I think if I got fixated on changing any one thing, I would just go down a black hole. So I'd rather not have the power to do it.
well, we loved your book and we're so glad it's on our list this year. So we look forward to sharing this with our readers. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be here, and I feel honored that Vivian is on the list.
Well, we love Vivian, and she is very popular in all of our middle school libraries. So
Hey.
everybody loves her.
Oh,
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today for our Spirit of Texas Author Spotlight with Kathryn Ormsbee. Be sure to check out our Spirit of Texas website for book club activities, read-alikes, and more, for Vivian Lantz'S Second Chances, and for all of our 2024 Spirit of Texas books and authors. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon to the Texas Library Association's Young Adult Roundtable YouTube channel and to our Spirit of Texas website. And just thank you again, Kathryn and Kim, for your time here today.
thank you.
Thank you.